You're tuned in to the Andrew Lawton Show.
The government did something. I don't exactly want to give them credit for doing it because they didn't do it for the right reasons. But at this point, I'll take the right policy for the wrong reasons, because the government has extended the amnesty that it set for guns that it banned summarily in May of 2020, notably the AR-15, but a lot of other firearms as well, about 1,500. And then a couple of weeks later, they added more to the list and all that jazz. And what the government has done, because that amnesty was put in place for 2 years. So originally in May of 2022, so 6 weeks from now, those guns were going to be prohibited outright. And if you were holding one, you would have been a criminal. And the little token, the little breadcrumb that the government gave you when they announced that ban was, well, we'll buy them back from you. And you may remember I did a documentary about this that was released in the summer called Assaulted, Justin Trudeau's war on gun owners. Let's play the trailer of that if you don't mind.
We are closing the market for military-grade assault weapons in Canada.
It really is my identity. It really is my culture. And it's every bit as legitimate as anyone else's culture.
We're just regular people that go out and have this as part of our being.
We are not the problem. The guns are not the problem, right? It's the public's perception that has become the problem.
On one hand, I'm going to the Olympics. I get to represent Canada. It is one of the greatest privileges that I ever get to do, that I get to wear the maple leaf and represent Canada. It is such a privilege. And on the other hand, I'm so devastated that I have no idea if at some point I'm going to get thrown in jail because I've missed something.
They actually pulled up, they got out, they had their guns drawn, and it was pretty much, I opened the front door and they're like, you're under arrest and you need to come with us.
Now, it's no longer coming soon. You can watch the whole thing over at assaulted.ca. And even though it came out in the summer, it's still very much a real problem. And the reason I'm playing that and talking about that now is because part of the government's prohibition has been that a lot of gun owners and also gun business owners have been saddled with inventory they purchased in good faith lawfully. Inventory which is now in limbo. They can't sell it. They can't use it. Many of them can't return it to the distributors or the point of sale. And this kicking the can down the road to October 2023 solves one problem, but it prolongs another. So let's talk about this with Rod Giltaca, who you saw in that trailer there, the executive director of the Canadian Coalition for Firearm Rights. Rod, good to talk to you, sir. Thanks very much for coming on today.
Thanks for having me, Andrew.
So obviously you have been pushing, the CCFR has been pushing in a very costly lawsuit for an injunction that would basically stop this in its tracks. Now, this is not exactly what you want because the policy is still in place, but what's your immediate reaction to the delay of it, to the delay of that amnesty expiring?
Well, it's what a responsible government would do. And when I say responsible government, you know, in relation to the current liberal government, it's, you know, I use that term loosely, but this is what you'd expect, right? This amnesty was to protect law-abiding gun owners that purchased their firearms legally, and by virtue of that, is a community that is in full compliance with the law at all times, and that are continuing to hold these firearms. You'd expect that they would extend that to not make us criminals while they get their act together with their buyback.
Yeah, and there was a story I was working on as recently as last week that this kind of sucked the wind out of here, but I'll share it on the show because I learned that a lot of businesses that have been saddled with inventory that's now prohibited. So a lot of the businesses that we talked about in Assaulted, which the CCFR was a very generous supporter of the production of, that for 2 years now almost have had, in some cases, hundreds of thousands of dollars of firearms they cannot do anything with. And what was interesting is that I got a hold of messages that the government sent out to some of these businesses within the last month, inviting them to participate in a consultation process. Now, this is again coming about 22 months after the amnesty was put in place, and they're only just now getting around to the idea of asking the people affected by this what it's going to mean for them and what a buyback should look like. So it says to me that this whole thing, which the government said was deliberate evidence-based policy, was drawn up on the back of a napkin when they had some political capital in the wake of the horrific Portapeak shootings.
Well, yeah, it was, right. It was never let a good crisis go to waste, and they weren't ready. And a gun buyback is not an easy thing to construct, and it's not a moral thing to do. So in the interim, if you have been paying attention out there, is they've been trying to wag the dog with all of these television commercials, like, firearm-related violence is a result of civilians owning firearms, right? Licensed individuals owning firearms. Mm-hmm. So definitely our gun ban is good policy. So make sure you vote for us next time there's an election. So, it's a big mess. It's really just a political effort. And I think this is the trouble implementing a buyback, the trying to wag the dog with all of this tens of millions of dollars worth of advertising, the focus groups, right? This is a political exercise, and they're trying to save that effort, I think.
Yeah, and they've spent millions and millions of dollars without buying back. I mean, I have issues with the word buying back because it was never the government's in the first place. But semantics aside, they've spent millions and millions of dollars on this without so far buying back a single one of these firearms.
Yeah, well, they're still doing focus groups, right? We had a member that is on the board of a gun club in Eastern Canada, and he sent us the questionnaire, right? The survey. Would you be interested in mailing through Canada Post, mailing your AR-15 in and us sending you a check? I'm like, what? Mailing so-called assault style, firearms in the mail system? I've got mail that's gotten lost. I haven't gotten T4s before, much less my AR-15. So
yeah, your AR-15s in the mail will become the new slogan.
Yeah, right. You can see them running around in a panic, trying to get this done. But the delay does not bother me at all. The longer it's delayed, the better. Our property is still in our possession. It gives time for the CCFR's lawsuit against the government that all of this is against the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and also against the law administratively. That gives us time to get that done. I don't mind the delay at all.
Yeah, and also, I mean, we're talking about a minority parliament here. October 2023 could bring us into election territory as well, and that, I think, is an important part of this timing. I'm leery to you advance this argument because I don't want to make it seem like I at all agree with this, but just to use the government's messaging for a moment. They believe, as Bill Blair has said, and as Justin Trudeau has said, and as Bill Blair's replacement, Marco Mendicino, has said, that these guns are killing machines. That's all they are. They're weapons used for murder. They're meant to kill all these people. And they need to be taken off the streets and taken out of law-abiding gun owners' hands because there's no lawful reason to have one of these. If that is what you think, letting someone keep it for an extra 18 months longer would suggest that maybe there isn't this firearms emergency that involves guns owned by the law-abiding. Well,
of course, right? I mean, Canadians have had these guns for up to 60 years, right? We've had these guns for a long time. They're legitimately used for hunting and sport shooting, contrary to what the government says, and they have been for decades and decades. Yeah, I mean, this was completely unnecessary. And like I said, the big thing to look for from the government in their behavior right now is them running around trying to legitimize what they did, because there's really not a lot there.
So let's talk a little bit about the lawsuit here. Now, you were not successful in getting the immediate injunction at that very early stage, but as you noted then, and I think we talked about it on the show, the case is still ongoing. So where is it now? And what's the main argument? Because you said there's a charter argument there and also an administrative law argument.
So when we're talking about the charter argument itself, it gets really detailed. So I'll just use plain language. We're asking the court to consider the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms and answer, can the government take whatever it wants from anybody, anytime, for any reason, without explanation or justification. And if justification is there, like, what does that really mean? Like, does it have to be based on facts or based on statistics, or what that is? So, because right now the government, in our opinion, illegally banned those guns. So the administrative side is that in the criminal code in section 117, it says you cannot ban a gun that is reasonably used for hunting or sport shooting, right? And of course, these guns not only are reasonable for that, they've been used that way for 60 years, right? Like, it's not even that we're making that claim. It's like history right there. So that's the administrative part. And the charter challenge really is about property rights. Can you own anything? And if you remember, Elizabeth May proudly stood up in the House of Commons and crowed to everybody how mistaken we are with our name, firearm rights, having firearm rights in our name, that you don't have firearm rights in Canada. In fact, you have no rights to own anything at all, no rights to property. She wears that like a badge of honor. So we're trying to say, at least, federal court, give us an answer. Do you have the right to own anything at all? Yes or no? Because if the answer is no, we just want to know that once and for all. If that answer is no, and at least we know what kind of country we live in, and we know what needs to be fixed.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. And I've always appreciated how you do approach it from the property rights point of view, because there are a lot of people that don't get guns, and they may never get guns. They may never be interested in them, but they understand owning something. They understand having something, and then the government saying, this is no longer yours. This is no longer something you get to enjoy. And it bothers me immensely that more people don't see that, the more people don't understand the precedent here of what's happening if you do license government to do one thing. I mean, not to compare things that are not related, but the Emergencies Act is a great example of this. You can hate the convoy, you can hate what they stand for, but that doesn't mean you have to set aside your discomfort about the longer term implications of this. And the same is true of government confiscation of your property. I mean, compensation or not, if they are forcing you to sell it to them, it's confiscation.
Well, it is, right? And this should be, it's very hard because it has to do with guns. And you're right, not the majority of Canadians don't understand guns because they don't own them, right? But this has everything to do with just fundamental, like very fundamental level freedoms. Like, can you own anything? Yes or no? And it's issues like this don't come to the forefront until the government does something, so kind of egregious that at least a large group of people stand up and be like, well, that's not consistent with your promise that I can own things and that I can live my life as long as I'm not bothering anybody. I have liberty, right? Mm-hmm. I can associate with people that I want to. It's not up to you who I'm friends with. Like, these are fundamental things, and people don't really think about those things until those things are being infringed upon. So in this case, property rights have been infringed upon. We have a very clear-cut case, and I'm curious. I don't blow smoke in any direction. So I'm not telling people, we're going to take the government to court, we're going to kick their butt or whatever because it's in the charter. I want to know how fair and how honest, the Canadian system is, both the judicial system and whether the charter actually means anything. Like, that's what this is really about. Because, like I say, win or lose, I just want the answer because that's really important to know.
Yeah, and the problem is you're not dealing with a government that is conveying this issue honestly at all. And it's not just about the odd person you encounter that has never handled a gun, so they don't know them. It's not a world they know. It's about people that are being willfully obtuse. I want to play a clip here and get your response to it of Marco Mendicino. So he's the public safety minister now. He's replaced Bill Blair, who I think was your prime nemesis in government for quite some time. But I want you and the folks listening in to hear how he describes this.
We've also introduced stronger and responsible gun controls, including a ban on assault-style weapons like AR-15s, which guns have no other purpose than to kill. Now, this order in council, which was issued in May of 2020, has already seen more than 1,500 different firearms from being prohibited from being sold in Canada. And in the near future, we will be launching a mandatory buyback program to now get these guns out of our communities and off our streets. Today, we're here to talk about how we're going to build safer communities.
again, that link between guns that are lawfully owned and the gun crime that is plaguing the streets of Toronto and Surrey and other communities in Canada. How do you go up against that when this is just said so easily, so readily, despite how devoid of a fact basis it is?
Well, it's incredibly difficult, right? And especially when it comes from legacy mainstream media and it comes from the government. Those two entities are they're most powerful forces in the country. So it's very difficult. I mean, the key for us, as far as our organization, is we have to communicate directly with everyday Canadians, and somehow we have to educate them that Marco Mendicino was talking about firearms that were prohibited back in 1977, right? There are no assault weapons in civilian hands other than a handful of people like movie armorers and manufacturers that make guns for the military or whatever, right? Normal people do not have assault weapons, and they will use those terms interchangeably. But yeah, I mean, to answer your question, it's incredibly difficult, right? Because we're just everyday gun owners saying like, well, we responsibly own these guns. We haven't done anything wrong. We've done nothing but comply to every ridiculous rule, because a lot of the rules are ridiculous. And we've complied without exception. Now, and our effort really is just to be left alone. So it is a really difficult thing, but we do a lot of work in public relations. We do, television shows and explainer videos, and we take out ads and billboards and marches and, tours and all kinds of different things, but it's a real challenge.
Yeah, and one of the things that I found very striking when Assaulted came out, because I was worried, is this just going to go into that echo chamber that a lot of pro-firearms content does? And certainly the firearms community was a big booster of it, and I'm grateful for that. But I was very touched by the number of emails I got, specifically on the episodes focusing on business owners. Because people understood in the midst of the pandemic the idea of businesses that were facing these just very unfair hurdles from the government, things that made no sense, beyond bureaucracy, beyond fair dealing, but actually things that just came across as punitive. And I felt that people were receptive to that when they heard the stories. But again, you can only have so many of those conversations. You can only have so many one-on-one discussions with people to get those stories in front of them. And then all it takes is one shooting. The government gets up there and just starts spouting off blatant misinformation, and which they've still never accounted for. I mean, I go back to the government linking Canada's gun laws to the guns used in Portapique, even though we learned after they issued this prohibition that none of them were legally owned. None of them were legally acquired.
Well, yeah, they were all illegally acquired. I'm a participant with standing in the public inquiry, the Mass Casualty Commission, right? So I know exactly what went on there. I have access to all of the evidence, and none of the guns were legally acquired. All but one were obtained through smuggling from the United States. This guy was a very well-known criminal and smuggler and abuser and known as a nut in the community.
And by the way, I should just say that that's where all gun owners are completely happy to devote resources and money, which is to stop smuggling.
Well, yeah, it's just called basic problem solving, right? But it's not problem solving. It's a political operation. And, the police let this guy circulate. I mean, they may have been helpless to stop him. Maybe there wasn't the right laws or whatever to charge him with offenses. And then on top of that, he disguised himself as an RCMP officer. So everyone had their guard down, and the police left him alone as he went through his rampage because they thought he was one. Point being is this to lay further gun regulation or gun bans on this particular situation it's absurd. It's lunacy. And unfortunately, I can't blame everyday Canadians for not understanding that, because they're busy and they don't want to deal with it. And it's very negative too. But it's just the injustice is terrible, and we're doing everything that we can to stop it.
Very well said. Just before I let you go, Rod, I know it's early days, but curious if you have any early thoughts from a firearms advocate's perspective on the Conservative leadership race.
I don't. We try to stay out of the process of the leadership election as best we can. But I haven't. I don't know all the candidates good enough to provide an opinion. But we're just hoping that somebody the candidate doesn't have to give us everything we ever wanted. The candidate has to actually walk a line between, leaving people like us alone and being able to win a general election. And I think a lot of gun owners, they get so angry at their own situation, they forget that. We need someone that has a chance to win in order to get anything. So where to find that middle line is difficult, but we'll see in the days to come as we get to know those candidates better.
Rod Giltaca, Canadian Coalition for Firearm Rights. Thank you so much as always, Rod.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.